looks like something that,
I think that's Hillary's,
Hillary
you know,
would- yeah, I'm gonna
capos
put
and
this
guitar
over here.
picks and stuff, you know,
Yeah.
don't mess with that, that's
see, it looks
important
like
stuff.
Hillary.
You know, the thing about doing this curating, it's called, is that I get to meet people that I've never met. I mean, you know, Josh came in over the transom, so to speak, you know, was recommended by a friend, and so it's a delight to have you here. Thanks so much. And Sandra Sidi, she and I had lunch recently in San Marcos. Her mentor, teacher Deborah Moreau, who was supposed to be here and wasn't able to. Sandra was a student of hers at Texas State in San Marcos, and she's currently teaching down there, but she was a military analyst in Baghdad in 2007 and 2008, and her first piece, Get a Weapon, was published in the Atlantic this fall and is forthcoming in a anthology about nonfiction, and I have a feeling that there's a book contract in the offing. Please welcome, this is her very first reading ever in the world. Sandra Sidi.
Here,
Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah?
you?
I might just hold this up. The essay is much longer than the time allotted, so I had to kind of cut out chunks, and sometimes I worried that I cut out some of the more positive portrayals of men, but hopefully we'll still get that coming across.
You're fine.
You know, so this essay, I was a military analyst in 07 and 08 in Baghdad, and there were not many women there. I think the ratio was around 1 to 10, and I just thought, but I had a close group of female friends. All of us had random different jobs. I'll talk about that in the piece, and I wrote this thinking, well, maybe people would like to see kind of what our lives were like there and how it was. So, okay, just wave your hands, Allison, if it's not too long. Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Duck and cover, a mechanized voice screamed. The ground shook and the window rattled. I rolled from my bed to the floor of my trailer and felt for the armor I'd left in my office. I lay there and sweated and swore. The voice from the loudspeaker urged me to get away from the windows. I was inside a tin can. I crawled to the door. My hand was on the knob when I realized I was wearing only underwear. The next impact knocked the air conditioner to the floor. I grabbed a light blue cotton robe and bolted. I raced along a row of sandbags, bare feet across gravel, one hand holding the robe closed. The duck and cover bunkers were 100 feet away. Another series of explosions and I hit the rocks. I lay there panting when I saw the bright yellow bunker tucked behind a row of sandbags and palm trees. I was up, running full out. My robe fell open and flew out behind me. Another hit. I was 20 feet away, now 10, 5. I crashed into the duck and cover, yanking my robe closed. A couple dozen men squatted and looked at me. Soldiers in military fatigues, some without shirts, contractors in cargo shorts and polos, other men in nothing but boxers. The curly hair on their chests rose and fell with their labored breathing. I should have slept in clothes, but my air conditioner was broken. The rounds hit like deep drums, but we were safe, packed together in 50 square feet of concrete. I leaned against the wall and tried to stop my legs from shaking. 2 more men in boxers joined us. A bearded, sunburned soldier stared at my feet. A half-dressed contractor took furtive looks at my neck. A major who often guarded the palace entrance offered me the one chair inside the bunker. You always say thank you when we buzz you through, he said as I took it. He smiled kindly. These men went outside the wire every day, in all that danger, that heat. They were heroes. They were lonely. The bearded soldier's eyes met mine, and then he looked away. I pulled my robe tighter. Finally, the attack ceased. The sirens quieted. I felt the gravel cut my feet as I walked back. I dressed and slipped my embassy ID around my neck. I ran my fingers through my hair and braided it as I left the Riverside trailer compound and threaded through the rows of sandbags, then past the statue of Saddam, its half head lying in the sand. Behind me, thick plumes of smoke rose into the sky. I showed my badge at the palace entrance, coded into my office. I walked past flashing TV sets and translators and headphones typing into keyboards. It was 6:30 a.m. Some hours later, my brown ballet flats tapped softly on the marble floor of the palace. This was 2007, and the U.S. military and State Department were working out of Saddam's Republican palace in Baghdad. I walked next to Morgan, who was new and whom I'd met the night before. At 23, she was 2 years older than I. She wore her long brown hair down, though she wouldn't for long. The men were excited about her. She carried a Bible, and I remember thinking this would help her. Men watched as we passed underneath a domed ceiling of red and green stones, glittering chandeliers extending from the apex. The table of women was at the back of the palace dining facility. We couldn't see each other socially much with our crazy work schedules, but we walked together whenever possible and gathered for meals. 6 or 7 of us, our trays loaded with barbecue and biscuits and salads drenched in ranch dressing. We were all happy to see Morgan, grateful for another young woman to talk to, and perversely relieved by the addition of another female to absorb the male attention. One of us was State Department, another a civilian analyst, and others military police. There was a cropped-haired, soft-voiced woman in the National Guard who dreamed of starting a goat farm. Beside her was a Naval War College graduate with shin splints and swollen ankles from carrying 80 pounds on 10-mile marches. She could barely pull her boots on. None of us had the security clearance to know what she did. I was a civilian, ferried over through third-party contractors to provide analytical support for Rear Admiral Gregory Smith, the new head of Multinational Force Iraq Public Affairs. This was my first job out of college. Nicole, ex-Navy, now a civilian analyst collecting research on reconciliation between Shiite and Sunni factions, joined us. On her tray was a panini the size of a football. Iraq's had a real ass-kicking this morning, she announced. Massive bombing outside Sadria Market. Teresa, an MP, mused aloud that we hadn't figured out how to bring democracy to the Middle East, but we had managed to bring Southern fried chicken and grits. Teresa was tiny, with more positive energy than a sunflower. She did security checks on the perimeter and was the command sergeant major's assistant driver. 2 soldiers stood up, craning to get a glance at us. One pointed. What do the men gain from it being like this? That was Silvana, an econ analyst with several master's degrees. She'd just filed a sexual harassment complaint against her supervisor. The food in front of her was untouched. It always was. Before I came here, said Amy, the National Guarder with goat farm fantasies, I used to like them. Men, I mean. Morgan, the newbie, said she'd scaled down her idea she might fall in love here. The odds are good, Nicole replied, but the goods are odd. We came for love of country, for patriotism, for money. We came to escape debt or marriages. We came because of television, Alias, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We came for adventure, for service. We came because someone had suggested we wouldn't. We were career girls, patriots, told by the military to head for Baghdad, or we were ambitious and reckless enough to ask to go ourselves. I grew up in the DC area, and like many of my high school classmates, I was shaken by the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon. I chose political science as a major in college and studied 3 languages, including Arabic. Just before graduating, I was hired by the Central Intelligence Agency's Middle East desk, though I'd have to wait a year or more to get clearance and would have little control over my assignment. I was thrilled to have been selected by the CIA, but I was also impatient, impulsive, and I had given next to no thought to what kind of work I wanted to do and where. So when a government contractor pitched me by phone, 3 weeks and you'll be in Baghdad, I said yes. When I stepped out of my trailer, when I stood in line at the dining hall, when I ran to the duck and cover, when I sat at my desk, the male soldiers watched. For some, I was the first woman they'd seen in months without a hijab. Men who said, I hate to see you go, but I love to see you walk away. Men with enormous hands, men with shoulders the width of door frames, with pistols strapped to their thighs, they watched. We'd meet men in a professional capacity, and they already knew our hometowns, our alma maters, our marital status. They openly made bets about who was going to get pregnant, who was going to get an STD. We overheard conversations we wish we hadn't, like after my first briefing of the Admiral, when one analyst in my office observed to another, I think she'll do well, and the other answered, just another woman trying to use her body to get ahead. Or the 4 contractors who didn't see me reading in a chair behind them as they watched Nayla, the Lebanese translator for the State Department. Fuck, look at that. Is she seeing anyone? Not since they sent that old bird home. Well, that ass is gonna be fucked. Do you know where she lives? Riverside, 242. Some of them women were married, had kids back home. One was quietly going through divorce. Teresa had deployed to Iraq with her mother, also a soldier, while Amy had come with her husband, a staff sergeant. When we sat together in the dining facility talking, he'd sit a few tables behind drinking coffee, but really he was watching her. The two of them lived together in a married trailer and held hands while lying on the floor during shelling. Some of us had been looking to date. Others couldn't be bothered with men at all. A number of us were virgins. I was lucky. Admiral Smith made it known from his first day that he personally punished any sex offenders. This made a real difference for me, I think. A colonel from psychological operations once propositioned me on behalf of his son. Honey, with him you'll be breathing twice as hard. In the office, though I was fairly safe, the only sexual slurs came from a fellow analyst who had a habit of calling me twat. But I'd lived such a sheltered life, I didn't know what the word meant, so I wasn't bothered by it. My job was to inform the Admiral of the most strategic events that occurred in Baghdad on a given day, incidents that would affect our operations, the stability of the Iraqi government, or our high-priority alliances. Each evening, I chose 6 events to highlight. Not long after my arrival, a senior translator in my office, let's call him Nazir, reached out to provide guidance. I'd passed the exams that tested regional knowledge and the ability to respond to hypothetical foreign policy and security challenges, but I was the only analyst without a master's degree. Nazir helped me keep straight which of the parliamentary factions were currently pushing efforts to boycott the Prime Minister, and which new militia groups were splintering off the existing militia groups, which themselves had splintered from other groups. Nazir was funny. He would find important events before they were reported in English, allowing me to give the Admiral up-to-the-moment information. Those first weeks, I don't know what I would have done without him. On a mortar-free day, roughly a month into my deployment, I sat outside the palace. The air was like the inside of a hairdryer. A squad of soldiers jogged around the T-walls, the 9-foot slabs of reinforced concrete lining the embassy compound. After they went by, I saw Nazir and waved. "Do you want to smoke?" he asked. "Sure, Nazir, thanks." He lit a cigarette for me, which I held awkwardly. I'd never smoked one. "You look tired," he said. I shrugged. 3 soldiers passed our table. The shortest one blew me a kiss. "You seem to have caught their attention," Nazir said. "It wouldn't be so hot for me if they knew how clueless I am." I looked at the sand and thought of another soldier far away. Nazir's eyebrows rose. "You've never had a boyfriend?" "Not really." I didn't think what I had qualified. I'd spent the last 2 years in love, a love consummated exclusively by email with an Israeli soldier 4,000 miles away, whom I'd met on an academic fellowship. "Do you mean to tell me," Nazir said, "that you're a virgin?" I decided to ignore the question. Nazir chuckled. He took a long pull on his cigarette. What would possess me to have such an intimate conversation? Now I recognized my extreme loneliness in a place where men looked at me, tried to attract my notice, but so rarely spoke to me as a friend. I see my naivete. I never imagined a man old enough to be my father, a highly respected professional whose knowledge and experience far eclipsed mine, would be interested in me. Nazir put his arm gently around my shoulder. "How about we change that, dear?" We women drank. We picked up smoking. Some flirted and slept with several men, or like me, hunched our shoulders and stayed out of their way as much as possible. Some of us loved Baghdad, no one more than Nicole, the doctoral student. She swore as much as the men and had jaw-length red hair so thick it looked like a crash helmet. And if there were more men than women around, she hadn't noticed. She was hard to it, or had gotten used to it. Others were soft, unbearably so, aware of men with every bite of food. We desperately missed our families. I think of my 10-year-old brother who was still into Pokemon cards. Secretly, I was too. We'd see soldiers who looked like our fathers, our husbands, our brothers, and find reasons to be near their offices and get caught looking at them a notch too long. We dreamed of home. For me, it was the leafy college campus filled with women I'd left only weeks before. For Morgan, her twin brother, who'd been sent to Afghanistan. Teresa dreamed of her 2 little boys, whom she feared wouldn't know her when she returned. Like Silvana, some of us reported male bosses for sexual harassment, though having a woman as a superior wasn't always preferable. For unknown reasons, Morgan's female boss despised her. She'd exclude Morgan from social events and question her work ethic. But I worked for a man as decent as he was powerful, a man who listened to me in the briefings, who sought my opinion in a room full of majors and colonels, a man with stars on his uniform who shook the hand of every Iraqi man he encountered and hugged the children. And when the security situation deteriorated and snipers and rockets began hitting the palace with frightening accuracy, he refused to allow me to accompany him to the broadcast room because the hallway had floor-to-ceiling windows. One Tuesday, 3 months into my deployment, Silvana vanished. She just stopped coming to work, no word to any of us. I emailed her, called her cell, we asked around, no one knew. Bet she broke her contract, Morgan said. She's probably home. Good for her, Teresa said. Who could work for that creep? I hope he gets AIDS, the Naval War College graduate said, massaging her shins. We discussed how to respond to Iranian encroachment in Basra. That's easy, Nicole wisecracked. She moved a chunk of red hair from one side of her face to the other. Tell him to watch it, or we'll fuck up Iran the way we fucked up Iraq. We laughed. Maybe we hadn't paid enough attention to Silvana. Maybe we'd wanted her to speak a bit less about her sexual harassment. We were there to prove how capable we were. I wish I could say that we'd been more curious about what was going on in Silvana's office, but we didn't have any way to speak about our vulnerability in an environment that placed a premium on female resourcefulness. Talk about being victimized ran counter to the narrative that we were strong. I didn't tell the others, not even Morgan, how the same day Silvana disappeared, Nazir put his hand down my neck and squeezed. Have you thought about my question? It's not that we didn't care about Silvana, we did, but we wanted to be in Baghdad. We wanted it badly, and we feared the noise coming from her corner would show us lie the truth we most valued. I belong here. Women belong here. I'm skipping sometimes. I know all the spots, Nazir whispered, leaning over my desk, his hand on my shoulder. A male coworker, the same one who'd said I was using my body to get ahead, fed a folder into the shredder, looking at me with disgust. He was convinced I'd pursued Nazir. I'd wake to the siren. I'd wake to the call to prayer. I'd wake to throwing myself on the floor as mortar rounds crashed around me. You know I'm a determined man, Nazir said. I read reports about sectarian protests and Sunni marginalization. I think I've been very patient, Nazir said. I read reports about kidnappings and IEDs. You are so selfish, Nazir said. In my dreams, I became the T-wall, the sandbag, the desk. In my dreams, I sank into the sand. No, I said as I disappeared. Please stop this, I told Nazir, but never anything more. I had no knowledge then of what constituted sexual harassment, never mind that it was illegal. I was also keenly aware of the importance of Nazir's work. He'd catch videos of US military convoys being blown up by IEDs on Arab channels, videos that fueled the influx of foreign fighters. Thanks to Nazir's detection, they could swiftly be taken off the air, saving countless American lives. I'd call the faraway soldier I loved and tell him nothing about the harassment. I wanted so badly to tell him, but he was in combat, and I worried that any additional stress would compromise his safety. After a particularly difficult morning with Nazir, I lay on the golden couch in the empty front entry, but the geometric shapes and concentric hexagons of the ceiling just looked like puddles of paint. Tears squeezed out the side of my eyes. It was my shift, but I lay there anyway until Teresa found me. She saw my face and didn't ask. While she didn't know the specifics of what was going on with Nazir, she knew the strain of harassment each of us experienced, and she helped me sit up. I don't belong here, Teresa, I said. I'm not tough like you or Nicole. Sandy, she said softly, you are physically beautiful, but remember your soul is beautiful. She put her soft hands on each side of my face. They could not be more beautiful. Other women kept us going. They prayed for us when we went outside the wire. They prayed for our boyfriends, our husbands, many of whom were soldiers, lovers we hadn't heard from. Were they still alive? It was women who searched the crowds of men in the palace each morning to see that we were still there. 8 months into my deployment, I hadn't seen Teresa for days. I asked the Marines at the door if they knew where she was, and they told me to check the front gardens, which sounded strange because no one would be so reckless as to go there in the middle of the day. Yet when I arrived, I saw her brown bun peeking out from inside the dry fountain. I trotted over her, about to make a fuss about being out there in daylight and rush us both inside, but I quickly realized if we sat inside the fountain, we were protected from shrapnel on 4 sides. Only a direct hit into the fountain would kill us, which seemed like good odds. The fountain was strangely magnificent. Giant stonefish leapt from non-existent water at the fountain. climbed in beside the fish, but Teresa didn't look at me. I nudged her with my shoulder. She sort of smiled. "Where you been?" I asked. "I was at karaoke night," she said quietly. "I laughed for 4 days. But there was no one to walk home with." Her voice was hoarse as she told me she'd seen and spoken to him, the guard, many times before, though never alone. She said good evening, as she always did when she entered her trailer compound. "He held out his hand and smiled, like for me to shake it," Teresa said. "So I went forward to shake his hand." That's when the guard yanked her toward him and forcibly kissed her. I twisted away from him. I just kept trying to twist away, looking to see if anybody was around. Anybody. I took her hand. It was so small. The guard had grabbed Teresa by the hair as she kept saying, "I have to go. I need to go." Teresa told me her thoughts ran on loop as he dragged her. "I'm going to be raped. Is this cheating on my husband? Why is this happening?" When he released his grip to undo her jacket, she made a break for it. She ran. She got away. "The whole time running, I thought he was going to shoot me in the back," she said. We watched a brown bird land on the opposite side of the fountain. "Even my mother's been assaulted, you know." She sat quietly for a moment before adding, "Several times." "Teresa, can I do something?" I said, "Help you report." "I did. She shook her head. I didn't react how I thought I would. I thought I'd be. Teresa was furious at herself because she hadn't fought back. Despite her training, she'd frozen in fear, and she'd lied in her report. She provided the location and unit of the soldier who tried to assault her, but claimed not to have seen his face. Teresa knew exactly who he was. She lied because he was still armed and lived a few trailers away from hers. How might he retaliate if she named him? She hoped the other soldiers in his unit would identify him because there was only one guard on post at the time she reported. They didn't. There were other stories of supervisors using trailer keys to enter female subordinates' rooms, stories of gang rape. There was the American translator, a civilian who worked down the hall from me, who whispered, "I came here a confident person." And the enlisted soldier, the only female in her unit, who sat across from me one afternoon in the dining facility, having just come in from outside the wire. Her sunburnt face was peeling as she said lightly that she'd slept with most of the men in her squad. When I smiled awkwardly and asked if she'd wanted to, she said, "I don't really know how not to. They keep me alive." She looked toward the other end of the cafeteria where her squad sat eating. One of the soldiers caught her eye and waved amiably. She turned back to me. "You know, I feel like a piece of dirt, blowing in whichever direction anyone chooses." The guard who assaulted Teresa assaulted another female soldier at gunpoint only weeks later. 9 months into my deployment, Teresa and Amy completed theirs. Morgan, Nicole, and I watched them preparing to depart. Standing together, saluting stiffly, they looked beautiful, and we were proud. I started to cry, thinking I'd never see them again. Nicole turned to comfort me. "Go back to the palace. Walk those halls as a lion," she said. In Morgan's trailer a few weeks later, we struggled to open a bottle of wine without a corkscrew, so we could break the rule against drinking. "I don't have cups," Morgan said, when the cork yielded to a combination of a knife and a screwdriver. "We'll have to take it straight from the head," Nicole said. We lay in Morgan's bed, and Nicole slipped off her bra under her shirt and pulled it out through her sleeve. That's what a magician does, right there. Morgan started talking about her brother, who is now a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan. She wasn't saying her words right. "You're drunk," we teased. And then she started saying she couldn't feel her limbs and her tongue was swollen and she couldn't breathe. And we were calling an ambulance. Morgan lay on a stretcher in the back of the ambulance. "Sandy, are you there?" She sounded like a little girl. "I'm here, Morgan." Morgan was medevac to London, where it was discovered she had a rare autoimmune flare-up, probably from stress. A week later on the phone, she said, "I'm so worried about you all. I'll be back soon." And my voice was stern, mean even when I replied, "Morgan, don't ever come back here," and hung up. Not everyone wants to hear stories of female soldiers living in fear of rape or assault. We were supposed to be Sydney Bristow, Wonder Woman, but we glanced over our shoulders, cried alone in the restroom, gave perfect briefs, and then collapsed on the floor of our trailers, never telling our boyfriends or husbands, much less our supervisors, about the looks, the hands, the fear, because hadn't we argued for years that women were strong enough for combat zones and could do the same jobs as men? I'd been in Iraq 10 months when the Sadr ceasefire broke. Rockets rained into the embassy compound. The mortars and sniper fire were so accurate we were wearing our flak vests inside buildings. At night in my trailer, the aluminum ceiling above my bed shone like a bullet. I imagined the roof peeling back like wrapping paper, my body sprayed on the walls. I slept a few hours a night. Everyone looked terrible, white-faced. I walked slowly down the hall, dragging my hand along the red mosaic of the wall, my shirt untucked, my hair around my shoulders unkempt and oily. When mortars took out several trailers and a prominent member of the embassy financial office was killed, we were required to remain inside the palace at all times. I briefed on the same bombings in the same markets, and then tried to find a place in the palace to put my cot, but the siren rarely stopped long enough for us to sleep more than 20 minutes at a time. In open areas, men were everywhere, dozens of hungry eyes. I'd set up my cot in the palace dining facility or hallway and lie there watching every booth that passed, looking and not looking at every face. I lived in fear that Nazir would discover me sleeping. I thought unpatriotic thoughts. I missed the sun. I missed the voices and faces of other women, Morgans, Teresas. I'm going to skip a bit where I broke the rule on going outside to send a letter to my parents. We weren't really supposed to talk to them on the phone or email, and I was really close to a mortar attack and was concussed but saved by another Marine. To the end, sorry. I gave my 2 weeks notice the evening after the mortar attack picked me up and dropped me near the post office stairs. Nothing worse happened to me in Baghdad other than being very scared. Amy, with her bodyguard husband, made it to the end relatively unscathed and started her goat farm. Morgan recovered in London and returned to Baghdad. Teresa became pregnant with her third child and retired from the military, which she'd always miss. I searched for Silvana on the internet and through mutual friends, but she was never heard from again. The Naval War College graduate recovered from her shin splints and became a lieutenant commander, serving in Germany. And Nicole, with her thick red hair, who liked to announce her arrival in the dining hall with a coffee cup slammed on the table and the words, "Iraq got a real ass-kicking this morning." Nicole, who loved Baghdad, was blown up in a municipal building in Sandra Sidi. The bomb had been placed for the Iraqi politician she was meeting. In one of her last emails, she wrote, "I love this job." It's been 10 years since I came home. The Defense Department's latest report, based on an anonymous survey conducted every 2 years, indicates that sexual assaults rose across all military branches between 2016 and 2018. Moreover, military women are less likely to report assault than they were 2 years ago. This despite the Pentagon's quadrupled spending on sexual assault and prevention and response programs, rising from $4.9 million in 2008 to $23.2 million in 2018. They've made a total investment of $192 million. Sometimes I wonder if it's the nature of war itself. We ask men to do violence and risk their lives in service to the state, to be paragons of hypermasculinity. Is it possible for them to shut off that hypermasculinity a day or a week later? Yet Admiral Smith treated women as fellow soldiers united in common mission. Lieutenant Commander Scott did. The men of the Italian Personal Security Detail did, as do thousands of soldiers performing their duty honorably under great stress every day. We lived together under fire. Soldiers were also brothers who made us laugh and kept us alive. I still remember the red-haired soldier fighting to keep the pulse of a young nurse. She'd been hit under the arm by shrapnel, but he kept working to save her, long past when he should have called it. I worry that raising these questions jeopardizes the gains women have made in the military, questions that imply we're a distraction from combat effectiveness. Speaking up feels like a repudiation that women can serve. I feel neither feminist enough, nor patriotic enough, nor brave enough. In a photograph of me taken during this time, my face is nearly transparent from lack of sunlight. Deep blues and purples frame my eyes. I remember a 21-year-old woman learning how to make strategic assessments about where to sleep, what to wear, how to engage with male coworkers without risking assault. I remember the loneliness of walking that tightrope, especially when Morgan and Teresa were gone. I lasted a year in Iraq. I don't know if I would have lasted longer, withstood the pressures of IEDs and mortars and stray fire over the Tigris, and a workload more appropriate for 3 analysts if not for the less explicable pressure of the ratio. Too many men paying too much attention.